Wilbert hadn't been feeling quite right ever since his visit to Sodor. His boiler felt mildly upset. However, it didn't interfere with his work, so he tried his best to press through it.
"Maybe it's all that suddering coal," posited the driver one day. "You're used to the Welsh stuff, after all."
"You're right," said Wilbert, chuckling. "I'm spoiled rotten on this stuff." He quivered at the words, remembering his most unpleasant incident on Sodor. There had been a mix-up at the dairy, and he'd drunk from the wrong pipe. It had been very embarrassing indeed.
"Oh, Wilbert's fine," insisted the fireman. "Don't be foolish, Wilbert. It's all in your head."
Wilbert wasn't so sure, but he never dared to argue with his crew. He had too much respect for them. That evening, all three were very tired. They'd spent all day taking tourist trains back and forth. Wilbert was glad to have been of service, but he was still feeling stuffy.
"Still got that rumbling in the belly, old boy?"
asked the driver sympathetically as he tapped one of his gauges.
"You're both worried about nothing," repeated the fireman. "It's probably just the frigid season. Even so, Clark, I'd feel better if we blew down, just to make sure we wheesh out any,
But the fireman caught him by the wrist before his hand reached the valve.
"Harry, don't worry. This is like when they changed the schedules. All you could think about was being late. But were we ever?"
But driver Harry wasn't listening to the fireman's words. His attention was focused on his palm.
"Clark, your hand!"
Clark looked down at his fingers and shrugged.
Nothing to a man in my trade. I must have been clumsy earlier and caught some embers." "Those are some strange burns," protested Harry. "Oh, I've had every kind,"
chuckled Clark, but he didn't sound altogether sure. "All the same, maybe you had ought to go to the workshop?" suggested Wilbert delicately.
He means doctor," corrected Harry kindly. "Oh, no, you two worry yourselves enough. Don't waste any of it on me. I'm just fine, believe me."
The next day, Fireman Clark collapsed. Worse still, they were climbing a hill with 5 carriages in tow. Experienced and focused, driver Harry coaxed the train to the next station alone, without raising a panic amongst the passengers. But he himself was frantic, not for the sake of the train, but for his firemen. Harry called ahead, and there were medics waiting for them at the station. They hoisted Clark onto the stretcher as discreetly as they could, but with an entire train deboarding at once only a few feet down the platform, they couldn't help but draw attention. The passengers watched with concern. Fireman Clark was looking rather puffy.
"I told you to see a doctor. You've done it now."
But Harry was more concerned than cross.
"What's the matter with him?"
"He's had an anaphylactic reaction," explained one of the medics as they loaded him into the ambulance. "We've administered epinephrine. His airways are already opening up again."
"Sir, do you have any allergies that you're aware of?"
asked the other medic, the moment Clark could find the breath.
I do,"
he mumbled defeatedly.
"Milk."
He gave Harry a shameful look as the doors banged shut. The ambulance took off into the town, leaving Wilbert and Harry behind in amazement. "Goodness me," marveled Wilbert. "I thought it was only engines who couldn't stand milk." Driver Harry shook his head.
"He should have said something sooner. Stubborn lad. And you were right, old boy. You aren't back to normal. You need a good washout."
When the driver had finished hosing Wilbert out, the loco pit below him was flooded with creamy white water. That explained everything. "Oh, I feel much better," wheezed Wilbert in relief as the last drops of dairy trickled out of his frames and down the drain. Clark felt much better, too, when he returned a few days later.
"You never told me dairy didn't agree with you," said Harry pointedly. "Doesn't agree with me," Clark smiled. "I'd say it downright despises me. Enough to choke the air out of my lungs, anyway."
"Why didn't you say something?" asked Wilbert, as he backed onto their morning train.
"Well, if I'd taken up work in a dining car, I might have. It's never been a problem before." "It was this time," said Harry sternly. "When you're ill, you're ill. Wilbert was right to speak up. You should have too."
Clark rolled his eyes, but Harry could tell he agreed. Next time, he'd try not to be so stubborn. But all the same, engine and crew silently agreed never to visit a dairy ever again.